Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Reverend Paula Skiles with Unity Church of San Marcos, and for those of you who are online, I welcome you here this morning. I hope everyone has had a wonderful Independence Day. Recently, we've been celebrating that, as you know. So I believe Jesus would really enjoy the story I'm about to tell you. It's about some really loving and kind indigenous people that were found on what was believed to be a deserted island. And there was a passing ship's captain, and this is something that happened long ago, right? And he saw that the island was populated and decided to pull in, nothing else, get some more supplies and see things. And he soon learned that the islanders had been visited by missionaries many years before that and had learned some English. And he decided to teach them the Lord's Prayer before he left. And so he spent several days teaching them the importance of those words and the words themselves and about Jesus and reviewing all that with them. And then he had to be on his way. But many years later, this same captain was going by this same island. And he looked over and he's noticed that there were 3 native men coming out to greet him. And he thought, I wonder if these are the same ones that I taught. And sure enough, he looked and he recognized them. However, he also saw they were not in a boat at all, but they were walking on the water. And they were just waving and grinning and saying, Captain! They yelled at him, we recognized your ship. We're so glad to see you, but we need you to remind us of the words that you taught us. We remember, our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, and thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as in heaven. And we know that prayer, but we have questions about many of the words, and we would like to talk to you about that. And he just looked at them and he shook his head and said, you more than understand the words. Just keep doing whatever you're doing. And he went on his way. Well, the natives were like a little confused. They sort of shrugged their shoulders and walked back on the water towards the shore, just wondering how to become the healer, like by becoming like Jesus, right? That was still their question. This begins part 3 of 6 of the series of the Walkabout into the Divine Outback that Jesus the Christ shows us. Are you ready for a walkabout with Christ? Maybe. Maybe not. We'll see. Part 3, Become the Healer, could be a part of that decision for you. Become the Healer is the title of this message. It's about the hope of healing, not only of life's infirmities, but of living more joyfully. Don't worry, we're not going to require that you even have to walk on water in order to do this as a part of a walkabout with Christ, okay? Because sometimes our questions about becoming like Jesus teaches us that we are only limited by our beliefs, all right? Would it surprise you to learn that worldly appearances do not have the ultimate control? No? Some of you, yes? No? Well, any situation can miraculously turn around in an instant as you and I focus or remain faithful to truth. And what is truth? Spirit. God is truth. And many other aspects of principles that we recognize. Rather than an anthropomorphic being, all-knowing and all whatever, that's part of spirit. It is those qualities that are exuded within us of strength, of knowledge, of wisdom, of love, all of those attributes of being. And so this is the truth. God is the only power. Regardless of what's happening in our world and around us and even within our world of our own body, right? We are never separate, nor are we undeserving to live in that truth that we are one with Spirit. And if we are focused on the words and traditions like sometimes we can get on how things should be and how things need to be and ought to be. And when people don't do that, how they are not doing right, right? We can, unlike the natives, get our bodies out of sync, out of divine order, and our hearts out of order, and our minds out of order, as we're trying to focus on that rather than the spirit. And so, you and I are meant to embody. We are meant to embody and become the healer by becoming like Jesus, right? Have you known people who have overcome all kinds of odds and had a miracle in their life of healing? I have. I've even been one at times in my life. So in this message, in my previous message, I referred to how Jesus spoke mostly to the common person of his day, right? And those people spoke in Aramaic. They were not the educated people that he spoke to. So when he said the word God, it was Allah in Aramaic. And it means several things. Variously, like sacred unity, oneness, the all, the ultimate power or the ultimate potential, the one with no opposite. And if you and I can take that understanding, the one with no opposite, even sacred unity, if we can hold that and that concept that you and I are never separate from that, ever. There's no way we can be, regardless of how we may think about that. Then miracles are a part of our understanding, but not because they're something that's special out there that somebody else can do or nobody else can do but Jesus, but because they are not the exception to divine law, but the fulfillment and the alignment that you and I have in our lives with divine order. The healing miracles of Jesus take three basic forms: faith, forgiveness, and casting out demons. Let's begin with faith. We'll start with the easy one, right? Well, maybe. Have you ever considered that healings are a natural part of the inheritance of being children of the Most High? Have you ever thought about that? That's a part of you? It's a natural part of you? We were talking earlier about how our very bodies are always wanting to heal. It's because our own DNA is coded with how to keep ourselves healthy. Our very DNA is coded, the essence of us, the very minute aspect of us is coded with an understanding of how to do that. And if that's true, then it makes no wonder why our souls look for healing and our bodies. So you and I can become the healer. We're actually meant to. Jesus taught his disciples how to heal through aligning with divine law. Now, we call them miracles today that the people of his day that are written about, and even before him, like Elisha. But his disciples and others have healed people either individually or in groups. And how come you and I could not? How come do we believe, so many of us believe, that we can't do the same? A number of years ago, a life-size sculpture of a man in an iron cage named Ishmael's Cage was erected on the campus of Northern Kentucky University. Ishmael sits slouched with his chin on his chest, and around his wrists and ankles are manacles and heavy chains. However, the manacles are not actually clasped, and the cage door swings open freely so that you can go in and out. There is simply nothing there that's holding this person in this cage except the weight of his own despair. The purpose of this sculpture is to show how people let their problems weigh them down and keep them imprisoned, virtually imprisoned within their own mind, and they can't do anything about it. Many of us are carrying around an extra weight. Anybody ever heard of those little weight vests that people put on to help exercise and make them stronger, right? Apparently, if it doesn't kill you, it will strengthen you. Okay, yeah, well. But many of us are carrying around these burdens, and they're not strengthening us. They are weighing us down. As a matter of fact, they are holding us prisoner, so to speak. The cause of that burden can be varied. Maybe we're feeling overwhelmed or anxious, and we have a lot of anxiety, panic attacks. Maybe we're really worried about someone we care about, or situations that we really have no influence over, or feeling a pressure to perform. Whatever it is that you're going through, what would life be like if you could live without that burden? What would you be like to live without that burden? To be truly free. Now, we have just celebrated our independence. But if you and I live without forgiveness, our minds and hearts are never free. Not truly. So let us consider the miracles of forgiveness. There's a story about King Frederick the Great of Prussia touring a Berlin prison. Now, this was quite a long time ago. And so this story may or may not be true, but we're going to say it is. So the prisoners all came to him, falling on their knees and proclaiming their innocence. All but one man who stood back from the rest of them and said not a word. So at one point, King Frederick asked the man, "Why are you here?" "Armed robbery, Your Majesty," he replied. And the king asked, "Are you guilty?" The man said, "Yes, Your Majesty, I am, and I deserve the punishment I received." Frederick the Great then called to the jailer and told him, "Release this guilty wretch at once. I will not have him polluting the minds and corrupting all these wonderful, innocent people who live here." So there is freedom in telling the truth and confessing our sins, so to speak. Now, sometimes the manacles and chains that weigh us down stem from a sense of guilt or shame from sin. And sin in the Bible has a number of terms that variously means out of order. But if you and I are simply trying to cope with something we've done that brought us into that thought process, or if we're trying to justify actions that were not kind or unloving or were harmful, then all we're doing is we're sinning against ourselves then. There are parts of ourselves, every one of us, are parts of ourselves that we deny or that we have cast out or that we don't want to even look at, and or we shame ourselves over, or we do this or that. We don't like to discuss sin much today, but the Old Testament had no problem with it. But in order to free ourselves from ignorance, guilt, shame, and false beliefs, we do need to talk about it, because otherwise it leaves us in a poverty. Ignorance is never anything but poverty of the spirit and poverty of life. Okay? So one Hebrew word for sin means missing the mark. It's an old archery term. Another is described as wandering from the path, or outright rebellion, or being crooked or broken. Again, the gist of it all is that something is out of order, and I call it out of divine order. Psalm 51 is one of 7 penitential psalms. Penitential means to pour out to God our regret and sorrow over sin to receive forgiveness. Now, the Psalms were written by David, who was one of the kings of the Hebrew people, right? And so he wrote this psalm after having committed what we call a king-sized sin. David had had an affair, an adulterous affair with Bathsheba. Well, in order to cover it up, he decided to have Bathsheba's husband murdered out, who was a loyal soldier, murdered out in the battlefield. Well, God sends Nathan to confront David about his behavior. And so David writes this psalm in regret and sorrow and seeking to be freed of that feeling, right? And he says, "Have mercy on me, O Lord, according to your steadfast love. I know my sin, it is ever before me. Wash me, blot out my transgressions. Cleanse me and create in me a clean heart." Now that is something that in one form or another throughout time many people have spoken. Not necessarily that particular word, but looking for redemption from something that has disturbed us long enough. And so I ask you this morning to say, do I have no sin? No. I sin. You sin. Everybody sins. We all sin. It's kind of like that song anyway.
Yes, the Yellow Submarine.
Yes, the submarine, yes.
We'll get to that later.
We got Beatles on the mind here today.
You haven't heard anything yet.
So we can align our lives by confessing our sin. Now confession doesn't necessarily mean going to a priest and saying, I have done this. But what it does mean is admitting the truth and looking at it and owning what it is that has occurred. How have you debased yourself? How have you stepped aside from something you knew was right? How have you, and being willing to own that and to know and recognize that forgiveness is a part of how you stay in a sense of oneness with Spirit and how you heal. Remember all those words I said for sin? Okay, well, there's a number of words for forgiveness as well. In Psalm 51, which was what I just referred to, there are 3 different words used for Holy One's compassion towards us. One means to stoop in kindness over one who has fallen. Another means God's unfailing covenant love, built upon God's own promises. And the third word is the love of a mother for her infant child. And the truth is that those 3 meanings for that are used in that one psalm just within forgiveness. You and I have a divine mother father who loves us unconditionally. And now we come to casting out demons. Okay. So what are demons? What do they represent? They are the untrue states of consciousness and error thoughts that deny the reality of our oneness with Spirit, with the divine. One of my experiences in my younger years, a couple of decades ago at least, I was in ministerial school and having some difficulties, and I ended up getting ill. And I came, it was Christmas time, and I was like, not getting well here, and I've got a break. So I fasted for quite some time, several days. And I meditated and I prayed about it. And in that process, I was blessed with a vision of myself, my soul. And that picture of me that I received was seeing myself surrounded by this beautiful egg of coruscating light. It was surrounded by demons. And they were digging in to this, and every time they dig in, my being, my soul, would cringe and would suffer and was in pain and would cry out. And each one of those demons I could name. I could see them, and each one of them were so filled with evil and filth, and they were just horrendous, looking as well as exuding. And what exuded from my soul was love, was exquisite. And every time one of these creatures, so to speak, reached in to take a part of that soul away, I felt the wrongness of that. I felt that that was not a part of what was meant to be. Each one of those represented my self-doubts of how I was unworthy to be, who was I to think I could be a minister? Or how I was not competent, or I was uneducated, or I was unlearned enough, or I didn't have this, or I wasn't that, or I wasn't. All of these demons were my own making, all right? They weren't some power outside of myself. They were all funded by the power of my own being and what I was putting myself through. And it sickened me. The moment I recognized that they had no right to be a part of my world, they had no existence that was part of why I needed to exist, I cast them out. I literally said no. And I mean, I just basically screamed, no, you cannot and you shall not do this. And they were dissipated. And I was healed in that moment, completely, from something that I had been quite ill over. And so I need to tell you that the demons are basically the tormentors of our own soul. Those are, when you hear or read about them in the Bible or the devil, what you're hearing about is that father of lies. It's that lie that we tell ourselves. And the reason for confession is about owning and recognizing we've been stepping off the path. We've been living in a way that isn't conducive to our health and well-being, and it keeps us from healing and becoming the healer. You can say separation from spirit as a sense that we have, that hypercritical judgment or the anger that becomes resentment, hardened hearts and minds that is apathetic, the rash or rude actions, depression, self-doubt, shame, self-destructive patterns, belief in outer appearances. The Bible calls those demons legion, and they are. They are. So healing on all levels includes all aspects of our being, whether it's a part of our personality or some aspect that we think is unhealable. There is nothing that love, forgiveness, and our own being, one, cannot heal. This message is part 3 of 6 of the Walkabout that Jesus the Christ takes us on. You and I can honor our maverick spirit that reveals a new way of looking at the world. You and I can open ourselves to the miracle-working power of Christ's Spirit within us, and you and I can become the healer through our faith, forgiving ourselves and recognizing we are one. And you and I can learn from our inner teacher, the Holy Spirit, as well, that you and I, let us be the mystic, one with God. Through our own walkabout with Christ, I pray that you enjoy and embody and know a greater life and fulfillment this day and more. God bless you.